Hi everyone, Anthony Head Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Fiona Apple album, Fetch the Bolt Cutters. This is a new full-length LP from legendary singer-songwriter Fiona Apple, one of the most enigmatic musicians of the 90s, and her once-in-a-blue-moon album release schedule has now led us to her fifth full-length LP, which is an interesting release for Fiona. Instead of getting more conventional with age, she is kicking off her 40s, sinking even deeper into the tense idiosyncrasies that have informed all of her records thus far. In a lot of ways, Fetch the Bolt Cutters isn't just the Fiona Apple that we've known, but the Fiona Apple we've known was always there behind the sweeter and more accessible aspects of her early records. Because she is sounding more in her feelings than ever, the resentment, the bitterness, the love sickness on these high-strung tracks, it's all turned up to 11. And the emotional strain of it all is enhanced by the very raw, rickety instrumentation, which is certainly noisier and more unorthodox than anything that was on Idler Wheel in 2012. By comparison, on Bolt Cutters, the vocals are wild, the pianos are a little blemished here and there. The drums don't even sound like drums half the time, they're more like anything that could have been banged on next to a microphone. Which makes Bolt Cutters like any number of Tom Waits albums in that sense, an artist whose catalog I'm sure Fiona is well aware of. Beyond that, I want to say I think there are a lot of admirable qualities to this record, but it is not without its flaws. In fact, I can't help but feel like this home studio setting that Fiona has embarked on this album with has led to tracks that are a little half-baked, especially when she seems to be working under the impression that the junk pile percussion and lack of a lyrical filter are replacements for just a good song. Like on the title track, where the noisy, odd bits of rhythm along with the dissonant chord progression and talk-sung vocals make for a very curious intro. The instrumentation blossoms beautifully for the first minute or so with a lot of jazzy resolutions, but once the hook hits, it's like the track hits a brick wall. From there it turns very stale very fast, and not for a lack of good ideas, but a lack of variation, and overabundance of indulgence as well as tension, but with no release. With the track Relay, it's a somewhat similar situation. The kickoff is great, bold, ear-grabbing, but what sounds like a cool intro just ends up being the song itself. 4 minutes of chants and naked vocal harmonies and booming drums. And as much as I like the sentiment of the song, the whole thing is just a bit too grating and messy. With the song For Her, I like the tragic, bitter lyrics all over this track, but the incessant, zany vocal harmonies along with the breakneck transitions just sound like a lot of time and effort being sunk into a gimmick. For sure, the ideas on this track would have made for a cool, ear-grabbing moment in a more coherent song, but what we're not getting here is a coherent song, especially when we go into this droning vocal transition past the midpoint that just seems like an excuse to bow out without the audience thinking you're just cutting things short. Look, I get how the more abrasive sounds on this record, along with the dogs barking, makes for a really cool, interesting blurb. But if we're being honest with ourselves here, it's not like these elements add up into the most crazy experimental singer-songwriter record of all time. The songs off this LP that ended up sticking with me the most were the ones where these more unconventional bits of instrumentation and percussion were used to back up a more focused song. The opening track, I Want You to Love Me, even with the slightly weirder instrumental approach, is classic Fiona Apple through and through. The elegant but grim piano, also Fiona's vocals on this track, growing more unsettling and wired. And the lyrics on the track just demand love in such an unapologetic way. And while I'm in this body, I want somebody to want, and I want what I want, and I want. She is like a wanting machine, an animal acting purely on primal desires. As lyrically, she also goes about rationalizing these feelings and this behavior with all of this flowery language. Lyrically, I think it's a very smart contrast. I also love the way the cycling piano passage at the end of this track transitions right into SHAMEIKA, as the intro of that track is like a faster version of that piano phrase. And this track essentially presents us with a story going back to Fiona's childhood, where she was dealing with some bullies. Then another tougher kid, I guess, gave her some words of encouragement, saying she saw potential in her. And the way this track plays out, it feels like one of those weird, spotty childhood memories that you don't remember the full context of it, but for whatever reason, maybe because you had some intense feelings around it at the time, you just recall elements of it very strongly. Fiona says on the song that SHAMEIKA was not gentle to her, she was not her friend, but she got through to her, and I guess at the time she must have needed that, and it meant so much that I guess she had it stick with her long enough for her to record the song for this record. We also have the very haunting newspaper, which is so dark in tone it reminds me almost of like a Nick Cave song, but narratively the track seems to be inspired by some kind of broken or missed connection with two other people, as she describes this male figure kissing her and kissing this other person, and then Fiona wanting to get in the middle of that, but then this guy is like basically poisoning this other person against her by saying things behind her back and basically trying to force her out of the picture. And when reading into the lyrics, this guy seems to have some abusive tendencies too. So in a lot of respects, it is a very harrowing track, especially with Fiona's vocals on the hook, which are easily some of the most expressive and dark on the entire LP. The song Ladies, emotionally and instrumentally, is a pretty big change of pace with its swaying groove and kind of charming vocals. There are some similar themes on this track as well, about not allowing men to dampen the fire or desires or agency of a woman. Narratively, it's not as specific or as to the point as Newspaper. It's a lot more big picture and abstract. Cosmonauts I thought was a great highlight on the LP too, despite the instrumental being as cluttered as it is. But this was, in my opinion, the last robust song on the entire LP, as everything past this point feels a little underwritten, a little too much like a motif, or just one of the more left field spots on the record I didn't get quite as much out of. But look, despite my complaints, of which I do have many with this record, I still did end up liking it, and I still do admire a lot of qualities about it, and for sure it's going to stick out as one of the most unique releases in Fiona's catalog because of the instrumental approach, the rhythm, just how raw the entire presentation is, as well as how great some of the songs on here are. And look, even some of my least favorite tracks on this thing do still come forward with good ideas. I just wish those ideas were packed into more coherent songs, or were pushed even further into the deep to the point where they were truly daring and experimental. As good as many parts of this album are, my biggest fear is we may only ever hear them in this state. I don't know how many more records Fiona may make along these lines, and it would have been amazing to hear the ideas on this project presented in a more robust fashion where they all felt a bit more groomed and a bit more thoroughly explored. Still, I'm feeling a strong 6 to a light 7 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Fiona Apple, forever.